Welcome back to my channel. This is a strange place to have my studio all set up, but I did this for a purpose because I'm going to show you the EMF, the electromagnetic fields that are surrounding me in these walls, in the electronics, even my lamp that's next to my bed. I'm going to explain to you why that could potentially be harmful, how to fix it. If that sounds interesting to you, I invite you to watch this video and let's get started. Okay, before I get started, let me explain to you my setup. There's a lot of meters here, and you don't have to have all these meters, but I have these multimeters set up because they're measuring different things, and I want to switch out cords. I spent some time before the video to set things up, and so I don't want to fumble through cords while I'm speaking to you and trying to teach at the same time. So the first meter that we have here is just to measure my body voltage. So it is grounded to the earth outside through a separate cable back here, this little gray one. And this little gray cable here is grounded to an earth rod or earthing rod outside my window. So this cable is actually grounding all of my instruments here. So that is the earth ground. I recommend that you have a dedicated grounding rod that has a clean earth ground to ground your instruments, because if you don't have a good ground, your readings will be off. To get good, accurate readings, you have to get a dedicated ground to the earth outside that's a good ground for your devices. So this is a voltmeter. I'm going to show you what happens when I measure my body voltage. So I turn it to volt alternating current. And this is where a lot of people make mistakes, because I'm an administrator or one of the administrators for a earthing and grounding group on Facebook. We have now over 46,000. We're growing like 400 a week. So I invite you to come in and ask your questions and join our community to learn how to live a healthier lifestyle in this inevitable season or environment of EMF, because we're going digital and we have electronics surrounding us, and so we need to stay healthy and safe because we need to counteract what EMF is doing to our body. So let's take a look here. So I pinch the red cord and nothing happens. It's all over the place. I got negative readings. That's because it's on direct current. What we want to measure is actually alternating current. We want to select the button here to go to alternating current. We're measuring alternating currents. We're measuring a sine wave of electrical current that is at 60 hertz here in the United States. And that's what's causing this voltage in my body. So you can see the voltage is running about 4.8 volts, alternating current through my body. And that's because of all the EMF that's surrounding me. My lamp, the electrical wiring in my walls, the EMF through a process called capacitive conductance. I'm conductive, and through capacitive conductance, it actually generates electrical currents in my body. That causes problems. There's EMF symptoms associated with that, like headache, fatigue, inflammation, insomnia, and other problems that are related to basically being exposed to electricity. Now, if I touch this cord here, this cord here is a earthing cord that goes outside into the ground, and it's a separate grounding rod. So there's two grounding rods. One grounds all these equipment, and the other grounding rod is this one that is where I hook up my earthing mattress cover as well as my earthing products so I can sleep on them. But I can also pinch the cord and see, look what happens. It goes down to almost zero. But there's also some resistance in the skin. So very dry skin can be up to 100,000 ohms. Now moist and wet skin can be down to 1,000 ohms. So I have some little bit of water here that I'm just gonna wet my fingers, and look what happens. Goes down to zero. So by grounding my body to the earth outside, I'm able to alleviate the induced alternating currents that are being induced by EMF around me just by grounding my human body. And that's what you want. And that's why we do earthing and grounding. So if this is all new to you, come to our group on Facebook, as well as come to my channel and go to the playlist, the earthing grounding playlist. And I have now probably a dozen videos on this topic to explain to you even the scientific reasons why earthing and grounding heals. So this second instrument here is an oscilloscope. So this will give us the waveform. What does the electrical current look like on a basically graph? This oscilloscope is measuring the stray currents, or we also call that as dirty electricity, which are harmonics and interference in the electrical system, as well as stray currents. Like anything that's shorting in my house, sending currents into the ground wire, it will actually pick up, and it should be flatlined. And if I connect to the earth outside, for example, that flatlines. So I now connected this oscilloscope to the earth outside, and it's flatlined. There's a little bit of interference because the wire that's basically 2 stories down into the ground also has capacitive conductance or capacitive coupling, and that causes a current to be generated, and then that can actually pick up a little bit of the current. But this is really good. That's clean. That's what we want. This is very clean. But when I plug this into an outlet that's off, I can measure a little bit of stray electricity. This also tells me that with this outlet off, the ground wire is still connected to the common ground of the house and also grounded to the earth outside through grounding rods. So using this outlet, the peak to peak, meaning that the peak up here to the trough down there is almost 1 volt, 1 whole volt. Now that is interesting because that's stray electricity. This is a properly grounded outlet. So if I turn this on, you can see that this is a properly grounded outlet. This is an outlet checker that comes with your grounding products. This outlet checker is saying, hey, everything is perfectly wired, which it is for code standards. 2 lights turn on, this outlet is wired correctly. However, code says that electrical currents can be as high as 2 to 4 volts and 1 milliamps. So depending on where you are, you can actually have up to 4 volts of electricity coming through the ground wire, and it still would be standard or okay for code purposes. That is not acceptable for a human body. If you hooked up to something that was throwing out 2 volts at 1 milliamps, I can guarantee you will have electrical EMF toxicity and symptoms of headache, fatigue, muscle aches, insomnia, and all these other problems that are associated with EMF toxicity. So therefore, even though this is a good, properly grounded outlet, I am still detecting stray electricity. So a voltmeter is made to detect higher levels of amperage. So you may have to find a voltmeter that is sensitive enough to measure the microamps of stray electricity that is maybe present in your outlets. So I strongly suggest that you do not entirely depend on an outlet checker to basically tell you that your outlets are good or not. You really need to have instruments to look at it, and if this is all too complicated, just get a stake outside, put it into the ground, and use that to ground your grounding products. I'm going to pull this ground splitter out where the oscilloscope and the other instruments are connected. I'm going to pinch it. So now the oscilloscope is measuring the electrical currents in my body. My electrical currents in my body, you can see, is a perfect sine wave. Peak to peak is 2.2 volts. So I know at 2.2 volts, I get problems. I have like muscle aches and insomnia and other issues, but the question is, we don't have enough research to determine exactly what is the threshold. How much electricity is too much? How much stray electricity is too much for the human body? So for me, I know that I'm actually fairly sensitive to these things because when I'm sleeping with this mat, my mattress cover mat, which is actually has a peak to peak volts of almost 1.28. So around 1 volt of stray electricity is coming through my ground wire. So this I know is causing me problems because I've been grounding in this house and then my arm started to hurt. My right arm had inflammation and there was no reason. I had no injury. I have no reason why the arm should start hurting. So that's when I started listening to people in the earthing and grounding forum where they're saying, hey, listen, we're grounding for months and we're having problems. And the stance that we've had before is that, well, 50% of people don't have problems. So in a recent poll, I found that 50% never had any earthing or grounding detox symptoms starting out. So half the population of the earthing and grounding community didn't have problems. So they're saying, hey, my outlet's okay, so therefore your outlet should be okay. But wait a minute, that is not true. That's not true. So we have Roy Cook, who is a 38-year veteran master electrician in our group. And he has inspected over 4,000 homes. And what he has found is that only about 50% are wired correctly. That's right, only 50% are wired correctly. So that means, sure, half the people who use outlets are gonna be fine, but the other half, they're gonna have symptoms. And we called it detox symptoms. So I don't think it's detox, I think it's EMF toxicity. So I've actually been recommending people to say, hey, if you have problems, switch over to a grounding stake, and guess what? Within weeks, they feel better. Now they have the benefits of grounding. So in medicine, for example, if I give a medication to somebody, and there's gonna be toxicity with every single medication, and so that means the toxicity is actually gonna be like this high for this med. But if the benefit of the medication is this high, they're gonna still take the medication and still do really well because this medication may be helping them with their disorder so that they're willing to deal with the mild side effects. That's what we call in medicine. They're called side effects. So basically, if you plug into a wall, it's basically a side effect of plugging into a wall, which actually is EMF toxicity. So you will have the same symptoms as if you weren't grounding, such as headaches and fatigue and insomnia and maybe heart palpitations. But when you plug into the wall, if your dirty electricity or stray electricity is low enough and you have great benefit, you're gonna feel pretty good. But let's say you start out pretty healthy. You feel really good, you're in good shape, but then you plug in and you have a mild toxicity. See, that's where people will say, I have detox symptoms, or I don't feel good. So when I started listening to them, I'm like, maybe my shoulder is the reason why this thing is hurting me, is because I'm using the outlet to ground. And so when I bought this oscilloscope and I looked at it and I see there's about 1 voltage, peak to peak, of stray electricity or dirty electricity, however you want to call it, stray currents in my ground wire, I was getting shoulder pains. So I switched to the grounding rod about a week ago. My shoulder pain, completely gone. It is amazing. I didn't do anything different. I think I worked out in the gym maybe once to see if I can work out the kinks, but working out at the gym should not help this shoulder. This shoulder is, without doing anything, literally got better. So I am really convinced that EMF toxicity is a real thing. We need to be serious about it. And that's why I'm making this video, to try to educate people on outlets and what does a properly grounded outlet look like, and that these ground checkers are not always reliable. They actually can fail and give you the wrong thing 5 to 10% of the time. Okay, so this is a multimeter and it's actually hooked up to the ground wire, so we're gonna see if we can measure any stray voltages. This voltmeter is actually measuring about 75, 80 millivolts of alternating current voltage in this ground wire. So there is a little bit of voltage. Remember what I said about building codes. They can be up to 2 to 4 volts. This is only 70 millivolts, and it's actually giving my shoulder a hard time. So what I want to emphasize to people, we have medical grade pharmaceuticals, we have medical grade water, we have medical grade everything, surgical instruments. We don't have medical grade grounding. So you can't just expect every home to be okay for a human body just to plug in and ground the human body. So unless you measure and make sure that your electrical outlets, and know how to measure and know what you're doing, because most people who actually hook these instruments up ground it to the same system that they're measuring. So these meters are grounded to the earth outside. That is the gold standard. That is what we want. We want to see what the electrical potential and currents are in respect to the earth outside. So I literally have 2 grounding rods, one for my meter and one for all the other instruments I want to hook up to. So if you don't know how to do it, please, in my group and discussion forum, stop arguing and telling people that if you have the outlet checker, you're perfectly fine. And if you have the product tester, the continuity product tester, that you're perfectly fine. I'm gonna get to this last. You're gonna be shocked by what I show you about the product tester. So this last meter just measure the amps, and we're measuring about 55 microamps, which is not very high. It's very low. This is totally acceptable within code for building standards. But remember, building standards can have up to 1 milliamp. This is 50 microamps, so very low current. But like I said, just because it's okay for a building or your washer or your dryer, your dishwasher, is definitely not okay for your human body. So therefore, that's why people are having illnesses and problems when they plug into their outlets. So another thing that I see in the earthing and grounding discussion group is that they say the product tester that comes with the product, that the outlet turns up 2 lights, and if the product tester lights up green, you're good to go. You're grounded. Okay, I'm going to show you what this product tester is. This product tester is just a continuity tester, meaning that if there is a connection at this little nipple to the back here metal plate, then it lights up green. When I push on this and there's no connection, it doesn't light up. But check this out. It's just connecting an alligator clip back here. All I'm doing is touching this here. It lights up. I'm not grounded, I'm not connected to the earth, I'm not hooked into the outlet. It's gonna light up because it's just a continuity tester. Now, something in medicine that we talk about is specificity and sensitivity. Sensitivity of a test states how well a test can detect a situation, disease, or in this case, how well can this product tester detect conductivity. That is sensitivity. So it's very sensitive. It'll basically detect everything, even air, if it's too sensitive. So you don't want everything to be too sensitive, otherwise you'll have a lot of false positives, because in medicine, for example, you'll detect cancer in everything when there's no cancer. Same thing, if this tester is too sensitive, it'll detect that everything's conductive when it's not really conductive. Now, the other part of testing is specificity. Specificity states how well does something rule out a disease or a situation, or in this case, rule out conductivity. So meaning that if the test has really high sensitivity and also really high specificity, that is a good product. That's a good test for what you're testing. However, if the specificity is garbage and it's too sensitive, the test is garbage. It's gonna make everything positive. So for example, My body, my skin, is probably anywhere from 100,000 ohms, probably, because I have really dry skin, but it can be anywhere from 1,000 to 100,000 ohms of resistance. So even with my skin, it lights up. So just through my body, it just says I'm conductive. So I got an ohm meter and I measured out exactly how much resistance can this thing detect. It will light up green up to 5 million ohms. That's pretty much almost an open circuit. So this tester is really useful to say a product is conducting, and it's conducting and performing to the manufacturer's standards, but it doesn't tell you how well you're grounded. Because at 5 million ohms, you definitely don't want to ground to something that is 5 million ohms in resistance. And so I'm gonna give you an example of what 5 million ohms in resistance look like. This is a wet paper towel, not even salt water, just plain old water. Most people would say this is not conductive, you wouldn't draw like significant electricity. So I hook the paper towel here, just wrap it around. It lights up with a wet paper towel. With a wet paper towel, I'm able to measure out roughly with these meters, it's about 5 million to 7 million ohms of resistance. Outlet checker is good because it rules out really bad things. So this outlet checker just says that the ground wire doesn't have any electricity that will kill you. Basically, that's what this is. But it doesn't tell you if it's adequate for human grounding. Is it adequate to reduce EMF symptoms associated with your ground? You actually have to test and see what your ground is outputting to make sure it's safe. This product tester, very useful. It tells you that the product is working, that is conductive. But it doesn't tell you that it's conductive to the maximum optimum conductance. It actually will tell you that a wet paper towel is conductive. So these two devices are useful for the beginner, but if you really want to maximize your grounding, you have to get a multimeter at the minimum to be able to test your outlets to make sure they're okay. But if that's too complicated for you, let me re-emphasize, just forget all this testing and just use a grounding rod outside. That is the simplest, purest way to ground, and you can avoid all this testing and also potential problems with the outlet. Now it's a 50-50, it's a flip of the coin. So you might be in the 50% that have no detox and no symptoms whatsoever, or you might be the 50% that have problems. It all depends on your home. I don't know. I don't know what's in your outlets. I don't know what's in your ground wire. So that's why I'm doing these videos, to help you to basically learn how to test the quality of your ground. Okay, so before we move into the next phase, I want to emphasize that, so I'm not an electrician. I'm not trying to teach you how to be an electrician, but you can safely test out your ground wire without messing with the live wire and the neutral wire. So I'm not telling you to open up your panel or open up your outlets, none of that. That is not what I'm trying to tell you to do. So I always give people the instruments and tools that they can buy. So on Amazon, these are really cheap. On one end is an alligator clip that you can clip things to, like the probes on your meters. It fits perfectly into the outlet, so you don't have to mess around with it. I don't recommend people sticking probes into the outlet, because if you don't stick it in right and the probes connect to the live wire or the different other components of the outlet, that can cause problems. So I recommend using these banana clips where you just basically plug it in and you're good to go. And you can connect this to anything you want. Okay, so this is another fancy instrument. It's called a tri-field EMF detector. I'm going to put on a electrical field detection. This is a red infrared light that I use for red light therapy, and it's off and it's still outputting EMF. There's also EMFs in my walls. About right there. So I was standing next to a strong EMF source the entire time that I was videoing this. So these fields, through capacitive coupling, causes that voltage in my body. And you remember, we measured my body voltage should be over 4 volts just by standing in this space. How about this outlet strip? The outlet strip is off, but at the source where it connects the electrical cord, there's still a high EMF source. So even though the outlet is off, it is hot in terms of EMF source and levels right there. Same with the lamps. How about my alarm clock? Battery is not very quiet. So let's see what happens to the EMF fields when we turn everything on. So the EMF fields are higher. The wall should be about the same, because that's just probably the electrical wiring behind here. Lamps higher. Lamps now very active in terms of a EMF level. Now the outlet, the entire outlet is hot. So let's see what happens when we increase the EMF field to this outlet. So the other question I get from people is, can I ground using an outlet strip? So let's see what happens to the waveform, as well as the voltage peak to peak, and how much millivolts is being drawn into the ground wire. Unchanged. It's about the same. So the answer is, if you want to use an outlet strip in a properly grounded home, it's going to be okay. There's not going to be any additional stray electricity or dirty electricity or any EMF induction of electrical currents into the outlet here to ground. So it looks like it's okay. So let me show you what happens with an outlet ground versus a earth ground or a grounding rod outside. So here's the waveform with a peak to peak about 1 volt and also at about 79 to 80 millivolts of alternating current in the ground wire. This from the outlet, zero stray voltage, and also this is flatline. So for me, I look at this and I'm like, do I want to ground with this wire that has this? Or do I want to ground with an outlet in a new modern home that looks like that? So let me throw this out again. Would you rather ground with an outlet with this amount of stray electricity, which is actually well within codes? This is only 1 volt of stray voltage, peak to peak, as well as measured as about an average of 76 millivolts of alternating current. So that is well within building codes, but you remember I was having an arm ache even with this. So do you want to ground like this, or do you want to ground like that with a grounding rod outside? So that's why I made this video, so that you can actually make your choice. If you want to ground with an outlet, and if your outlet looks like this and it doesn't bother you, because every human being is different, then continue with the outlet. Not a problem. It's kind of like that medication that I said will have a little bit of side effects, but a lot of benefit. So if you have a lot of benefit, a little bit of side effects, continue doing what you're doing. But if this is causing you problems, like headache and fatigue and insomnia and muscle aches and depression and anxiety and heart palpitations and even digestive problems, then therefore switch from an outlet to a rod outside. And then it looks like that. Okay, so the take-home messages are, make sure that the grounding products are working properly. That means check your body voltage and make sure that there is at least a 90 to 95% body voltage alternating current drop. Because an ungrounded product will actually conduct electricity and through capacitive coupling increase the electricity or the voltage in your body. So absolutely make sure the grounding products are working. 2, make sure your outlets are clean. So you should invest into a multimeter at the minimum, and I also encourage people to get the oscilloscope. It's only $100. So it actually can look at the waveform that's coming out of your ground and tell you if it's clean or not. And even with my relatively low levels of stray electrical currents in the ground, I still had literally an arm ache for months, 2 to 3 months, and I just could not figure out what it was until people in the earthing and grounding forum were complaining about the same thing. And then that's when I asked, maybe my ground in the outlet is not adequate for me. And so I switched to a grounding rod and my arm actually feels better. It just took a week and now, I can have full motion and full range and it's great. And so for me, I do a lot of eye surgery, so I'm sitting at the microscope, and if I have a problem with my shoulder, that is actually now causing a problem in my livelihood. It prevents me from actually doing microsurgery work. If this testing is intimidating to you, just forget it all and just use a grounding stake outside. Forget the outlet, use a grounding stake outside. If you are using the outlet and it makes you feel ill, any of the symptoms I've talked about, headaches, fatigue, insomnia, depression, anxiety, muscle aches, heart palpitations, forget the outlet and just purchase an earthing rod and use it outside. Now with the grounding rods, you got to make sure that the grounding rods are installed into an area of dirt that's moist, that's conductive. So I like to pick somewhere where there's green plants with a lot of roots and stick the stake down. So a 12-inch stake is probably the minimum that you need, but if you want to go with a 4 to 8 foot copper grounding rod, that's even better. And you can actually attach your earthing rod to that, or actually make your own setup where you bring in to the house a copper wire from the grounding rod and then connecting it to your earthing cord. Thank you for joining me today. If you have found that this video is useful or helpful, please remember to like, comment, and share. And until next time, have a wonderful day. Thank you very much.